Welcome to the book of Daniel. But not as much as might be thought. We're going to look at the apocalyptic time prophecy in the Bible. We're not going to look at all the time prophecy. We're going to look at the apocalyptic time prophecy. So anyway, before we begin, once again, let's ask for God's presence. Father, we ask that you will send your Holy Spirit to clarify this portion that we're looking at. Pray for understanding. Pray for guidance from your Spirit in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, before you start, go ahead and grab this sheet. Predicted coming of Messiah. Because we will get to that in a few. We're not going to start with that.
We already have that, right?
Yeah, you should have it already. Now, I want to share something with you. Some people say prophecy is hard to understand. This was drawn by a 6-year-old when we were doing this topic at Mountain View, and we were comparing Daniel 7 and Daniel 2, and this is what the 6-year-old came up with, and he just did this all on his own. So, you know, maybe it's not quite as hard as some people think it is. But I thought I'd show you that's real cute. That his spelling isn't great, as you can tell. He got Rome right, Greece, G-R-E-S, Papal Rome, and then you have the Deacon and the beast, the bear, and the Lin wings. I thought that was pretty good.
That is fabulous.
And he showed it to me after that. I got to have a picture of that.
What a witness.
Yeah.
What a witness.
So anyway, I thought you might like that. So let's go on. Let's start with the 10 years of Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10. The 10 years of Revelation 2 and verse 10. And this is sort of apocalyptic and sort of not, but since it's in the apocalypse, Revelation, I thought we'd look at it. Do not fear those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Now, just quite simply, this designates the 10 years of persecution that the church would experience under the Emperor Diocletian. And we found out that's exactly what happened. Now, let's go to the 2300 years. 2300 years, and we've been over this several times. We found this in Daniel 8, 13, and 14. And remember when we looked at this, we saw that this was a transition point in the book of Daniel. Daniel 8:14, and he said unto me, for 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. I said 13 through 14, I did that wrong. And I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said unto me, for 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now this is the longest time prophecy of the Bible, as we've mentioned several times. There's no time prophecy to extend beyond this one. And this time period is totally ignored by a lot of people. And those who do refer to it very often ignore the day-year principle, and at the same time applying the day-year principle to the 490-year prophecy. And many times when they interpret this, they use the 1,260 days as literal days, more or less. The only thing is that, as you'll see, we're going to look at in a few minutes, there are 490 1260 days never work out exactly to anything. It's all approximate. And if you take it like it's written in the Bible, and the Bible means it, I believe, then it will come out okay. Now, then we have the 1260 days, years, and these are the different things that are referred to. The 1200 days, years, are 42 months, or a time, times, and the dividing of time. And we see them in all these passages. So let's just run down them real quick. Daniel 7, verse 25. And he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend, or the King James says, shall think to change times and laws. And the saints shall be given over into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So a year, 360 days, times 2 years, 360, 720. Is that right? And then half a time would be half a year, for a total of 1260, or 42 months. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever after the time, times, and half a time, or at the end of the time, times, and half a time. And we saw how that Napoleon did send his General Berthier to invite the Pope to come live in France for a while. And that was in the year 1798. Blank. Thank you, Kirk. Okay, 12:7. We just read that in the last. Thus heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, and he held his right hand and left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that there shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. So we have that repeated there again using time, times, and half a time. Now let's go to Revelation 12. And verses 5 and 6. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God in his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, that there they should feed her for 1,260 days. So we have 1,260 days there, and then go down to verse 14. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time. Exactly the way it put it in Daniel, from the presence of the serpent. And then 13, 4 through 7. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth, and in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. So we find there the 42 months mentioned. And this period of time is the time that the Antichrist would rule supreme, and that is 538 to 1798. And we looked at that on the chart several times. And again, at the end of that time, the French took the papacy captive. Now there is a 1260-day prophecy that we see in Revelation 11, 1 through 13. And I don't know if you want to read the whole passage or not, but we'll get started at it. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside for the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. So you have the 42 months and the 1,260 260 days, both mentioned right there in that passage. And then go down to verse 9. Then those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, but not allow their dead bodies to be put into the grave. Now, 3.5 days is interesting as the 3.5 there, but it's not the same prophecy as the 1260. 3.5 days would be 3.5 years, if we take the literal day for a year. And this was the time when the French Revolution tried desperately to totally get rid of religion. And the things they did, and we went through some of that before, but it tried to do totally away with God, and one of the things they did was go to a 10-day week. Of course, they went to the decimal system, and a 10-day week seemed to be logical, but there was another reason for the 10-day week, because the 10-day week was an effort to do away with the 7-day week, which was rooted and grounded in the Word of God. We have no astronomical logic for a 7-day week. It has nothing to do with the moon or the stars or the sun or anything like that, or the circle of the earth. It's arbitrary. God made it. That's the only reason we have it. So we have a 7-day week, which is rooted in creation. Now, the approximate dates for this French Revolution at its worst were November 10, 1793 to June 17, 1797. Now, if we look at 11, 8, and 9, it says, in their dead bodies, and this is speaking of the two witnesses, which I believe is reference to the Old and New Testament, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Then those from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will see their dead bodies 3.5 days, and will not allow their dead bodies to be put into graves. So those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry, and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. And then verse 11, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Now here's a list of things that happened, a few of the things that happened during the French Revolution that help us with this understanding. On October 5, 1793, the revolutionary calendar was established, making for the 10-day week. And then on November 10, a statue of liberty, and it's interesting, the French made us a statue of liberty, but they made a statue of liberty, of freedom from religion, of freedom from the royalty, and they made put them as a goddess of the French people, and replaced the image of Mary. Now, of course, we understand that Mary was not a god, but the Statue of Liberty became the goddess of the French people. And interestingly enough, they made a mound, made a little mountain. And by the way, how did the pagans worship in the past, in Israel's time? They worshiped on the mounds, among the trees. And then they built a temple to philosophy. They worshiped philosophy. In November 10, there's an account of burning Bibles in the portions of the Bible. In November 24, there was a statute passed ordering the closing of all churches. And notice here, this is a church. But look what it says down here. Liberté, égalité, fraternity. If you translate those into English, that's the cries that are driving the world right now. Equality, liberty, and brotherhood. Temple de la Reason et de la Philosophy. The church turned into a temple of reason and philosophy. Yeah. June 1797, there was a request to use the church bells to herald in state needs, state officials, state things. But you get to September 17, 1797, Catholicism had pretty much been restored. And this is close to the end of the 2300 days, but it is after the end of the 1260, as we've seen over and over now. And interestingly enough, the French Revolution was never squashed. What we see going on in our politics now is nothing but a replay of elements of the French Revolution. Out of the French Revolution came communism, atheism, fiat money policy, where money could be made from faith in something, which if you don't have faith in it, then it's not worth anything, which is basically what our world is working on right now. Now get out your 490-year prophecy sheet, and we've gone over this several times. And as we do, I want to encourage you, as you are studying the Bible and you're trying to figure out something, look for the simplest explanation first. God does not he's not in the business of making things complicated. He's in the business of revealing things. And if that doesn't work, look for the next most simple explanation. God didn't give us his word to hide it. He gave it to reveal it. So let's look this over again carefully, and the ways that it has been misinterpreted. Now, as we look here, we see that in the midst of the week, we go from 457 BC, which most people agree with that time or somewhere close to that. And then 408 BC, Jerusalem was rebuilt. Birth of Jesus about 4 BC. When they were figuring the birth of Jesus, the priests that did it didn't get it right. You see, the 4 to 6 BC. And then Jesus became Messiah in 27 AD. And from 27 to 34 AD, it says in the middle of the week, Jesus was cut off. Now, it doesn't say that something else was cut off. It says he was cut off. So the last 7 years from AD 27 to 34 are many times put off way into the future, near the end of time. And that is called the gap theory. And we're going to look at some of that in just a minute. Now, the first 3.5 years take us up to the cross. And some people say from the cross until some point near the end of time, there is a gap. And that's called the revised gap theory. Some people believe that the beginning of the 490 years was in 444 BC or some other year. We've seen on the chart how it clearly shows that it was in 457 BC. And then some people say that this prophecy says that the temple is to be rebuilt at the end of time. Well, the only thing Daniel 9 says about the temple is it's going to be destroyed. It doesn't say anything about rebuilding it. Will it be rebuilt? Well, I can't say that it won't. But if it is rebuilt, it is not rebuilt by followers of God, it's rebuilt by followers of Satan. Because it will be restoring the sacrificial system, which the sacrificial system was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And if you turn around and say we got to go back to that, you're denying the efficacy of the ministry and death of Jesus Christ. And I'm not going there. I'm not going there. And then some people say Israel ruled all the world before Christ comes. No biblical evidence for that. But this theory is helpful if you need an end-time Antichrist that suddenly appears out of nowhere and does all sorts of nasty things. And then some people say, well, the church is with the Lord during the reign of the Antichrist. Well, the Bible's clear that the righteous will not leave the earth until the second coming. The Antichrist persecutes the righteous. It's very clear over and over again. The righteous are persecuted by the Antichrist. And then why would the Antichrist persecute those who believe in and support him?
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
No, it's illogical.
So anyway, among other things, I think the Bible is okay if we use, a logical way of thinking with it. And then number 6, the church is with the Lord during the reign of Antichrist. The Bible says the righteous will not leave this earth until the second coming. It's very clear on that. Now, number 7, the Antichrist confirms and breaks the covenant with who? Well, my response to that, it is Jesus Christ that confirmed the covenant with his people. It was the Antichrist power that developed this doctrine to take away the focus from himself. Now, I'm going to show you some charts that are partly right and very wrong. Now, this one is one of Daniel's vision of 70 weeks of years, and I wish my little laser would point. You can't really see it. But you see it starts here, it goes 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and it stops April 6, 33 AD, and then it jumps the gap until when? It just, I mean, this is the way it will look if you were, grabbing on it.
Oh, wow.
To take away the legs of the image. Yeah. So that's one way of looking at it. And notice how they go into all the contortions to count the number of days and so forth and so on, and add these days here and take away those days there. Brothers and sisters, keep it simple. Keep it simple. And then here's another one. 454 BC, when they want to start at 454 BC, but notice they have the gap there, and then there's over 1900 years, and then there's a prophetic week, and it doesn't make sense. They're going to get better. They get better. Now here's another one. The Messiah cut off in AD 33, the city destroyed in AD 70, which I agree with. But when the city was destroyed, they insert the gap in time there. And then they take that last week of the prophecy and push it all the way, that last week, the 490-year prophecy, and push it all the way to the end of time, starting at point unknown. So, and here we have again the 70th week of the 70th week, and a gap in there. And they tried, notice the gap here, Revelation chapters 2 and 3, which Revelation chapters 2 and 3 covers the church throughout time, and it's not just that time. So they got a gap there, and then the 70th week starts the second year peace agreement to rebuild the temple. Will such a thing happen? I think Satan will be glad to provide such a thing. But is it a godly thing? No, it is not. And then the Messiah, the Prince, returns at the end of Daniel's 70th week. And again, it takes a simple prophecy and makes it convoluted. This one looks even more simple, but it's got the prophecy ending in AD 33, and then the church age, the mystery, the dispensation, the 70th week, again, put way off, who knows where. With what events, who knows. This one I found confusing, because they're going this way on the 1335 and that way on the 1290, and they got the 4th year of the week of the 70th week of Daniel, which is nowhere mentioned in Scripture. And anyway, the 7 years, the tribulation, great tribulation, Jacob's trouble. Anyway. This one I love. Here we have the prophecy, and you have the Eastern and Western division of the Roman Empire, which is not too bad up to that point. But look at the toes. The toes go for, what, 1,000 years? Here's a close-up, see? 10 toes of the image, extend over the tribulation, and so forth and so on. Again, taking something that's very simple, making it very complicated. This one, I don't know. I looked at this chart and tried to figure it out. But again, you've got the gap there, or nothing works. You've got the tribulation of 3.5 years, which the Bible never talks about 3.5 years of tribulation. And then this is the 70 weeks trying to fit God's people, Israel, which we're going to talk about Israel in just a minute, into the picture. And you see AD 70 to AD 1948, which is a gap. And then you have another gap, and then you have another gap in the middle of the week after. Yeah, I'm not trying to be silly, but I'm trying to say, where does this come up from the Bible?
1948, Israel.
Right, became
Yeah.
a nation.
Isn't this much simpler? 483 years, Jesus is baptized, he dies on the cross, and the gospel goes to the Gentiles.
There you go.
Very simple. And a lot of these things are tied up, and as you've seen, we go through these graphs, with a teaching that all the Old Testament prophecies will be literally fulfilled because God cannot lie. So they must be literally fulfilled to literal Israel at the end of time. All of those prophecies that God made to literal Israel, giving them national greatness, were based on the fact that they would be faithful and obedient to him. Israel was not faithful and obedient. Those prophecies do not have to be fulfilled. And we can look at that a whole topic later on. I've got a little bit of information on that. We don't have time for it tonight. But let me say this in brief. God will not fulfill his good prophecies to a modern Israel who has rejected salvation at this time any more than he did Israel who rejected salvation in the ancient days.
Right.
There's no difference.
You can't.
And brothers and sisters, Israel today is not a religious nation. It is a secular nation. It's a friendly nation to our country, but it's not a godly nation. It's a secular nation. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's any godly nations in this world right now. So, now, I want to look at one more thing, very fascinating because of its dramatic fulfillment. And we find this in Revelation chapter 9. And I think there's a handout on this. Hang on just a second. Yeah. This is, people ask about, is Islam in the Bible? And I believe that this document here can verify that, yes, it is. Revelation 9, 1 through 12. And let's just read that quickly. Revelation 9, 1 through 12. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace, so that the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, nor any green thing or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God in their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days men will seek death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. And they had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. One woe is past. Behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things. Now we have verses 5 and 10 referring to a period of 5 months. 5 months in verse 5 and 5 months in verse 10. Now prophetically, 5 months is 150 years. Now what scourge on Christianity lasted 150 years? Now you go to the handout right now, and you will see that the 390-year, 15-day prophecy, and how it's described. The breakdown: 150 years, 5 months, 5 times 30 days equals 150 days, or 150 prophetic years. And then you find that there's another time period, and let me say at this point, before we go any further, that the clue in studying anything right is to ask the right questions. If you don't ask the right questions, you're going to come up with the wrong answer, obviously. So in connection with the apocalyptic prophecy, I would suggest a few, and you may come up with more on your own. Number one, why would Jesus want the sacrifices reinstalled if he was the once and for all sacrifice? Would he want them reinstated? Why did Jesus say on the cross, "It is finished"? Well, let's go back to this one here, and we'll come back and look at some more of those. So we find that the next part of that prophecy has 391 years and 15 days. And just to make the story short, you can read this whole thing, but the Ottomans, which was the Islamic power at that time, had fought the Christians for years. Now, the 150 years, it says that they were not allowed to hurt the grass and so forth. Only those whose names, well, how did it say that again?
Which has not the seal of God in their forehead.
Yeah, not to harm the grass or any green thing, or those, but only them who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. When Islam was first in ascendancy, this first 150 years, they were very patient, shall we say, with the Christians, but they were very hostile to the papists. And we don't realize that Christianity was very strong in the Middle East for a long time. And they had enemies in the Western Church, and they had enemies in Islam. But, gradually over the years, Islam has run most of the Christians out of that area. And then we have another time period. It goes on, and during that time period, they did persecute and kill and so forth and so on. So anyway, bottom line, the Turks were in trouble, and they were in a war. There was a man in 1840s, and his name was Josiah Litch, wasn't it? Yes. Josiah Litch. And he said that the Ottoman Empire would lose its power in a particular time, August 11, 1840. That was a pretty bold belief, but he was basing it on the time prophecy. And interestingly enough, it looked like a peace treaty was going to be signed, a treaty signed that the European powers were going to protect the Ottoman Empire. And that document was to be signed at a certain date. I believe it was supposed to be signed on August 9. But the document was late, 2 days late, or how many ever days late, and arrived on August 11, 1840, and it was signed then just as the Bible prophesied. Anyway, read this, dig through it. It's very interesting, and I can tell you this, but you do better if you just read it for yourself. Now, again, back to asking the right questions. What internal evidence in the book of Daniel or the rest of the Bible teaches the gap theory? Is there anything in the Bible that gives you any evidence of that? In Daniel 9:24 through 26, the 70 weeks were not cut off. The 7 years are not cut off. The Messiah is cut off. Now, it does say that this part of time was separated for Israel, but it doesn't say that that period is a big gap going down to a later time. Another question we need to ask: was salvation really any different for the Jew than it is for the Gentile? And some people say yes, but I say no. The sacrificial system tells us that our high priest was also our sacrifice, is also our minister in heaven. He's everything, and there's no other way. There's no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. Now, another question, do the religious prophecies to Israel as God's people stand even if they're a secular nation and have not accepted the Messiah? I think you would have to be fooling yourself if you said yes. Because God's not going to honor a nation that's not honoring Him. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Now, if Paul was right when he said that he was called to take the gospel to the Gentiles, and the Jews were rejected as a nation because they rejected the Messiah, why would they once again be made a nation blessed by God when in 1948 they did not accept Him? They became a political power. Had nothing to do with God. Had nothing to do with God. Let's look at Numbers 14, 11, and 12 for some evidence there. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me with all the signs which I have performed among them? I will strike them," verse 12, "I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they." Now, of course, we know that Moses said, "Oh Lord, blot me out if it saves the people." And we know that whole story. But that's what God's feeling were. If they rejected Him, He would have to reject them. Not that He wanted to. Let me ask you another question. Is there a reason why someone would want the Antichrist to show up only at the end of time? Well, maybe it's somebody that had been called the Antichrist and they wanted to deflect everything from them back in the 1500s. And when the reformers were saying that the papacy was the Antichrist power, and you come up with two totally opposite views from the papacy, that the Antichrist already came or he isn't here yet. Why would they get two totally opposite theologies? Which one of them is true? I'll say neither one.
Distraction.
I'll say neither one. Because the Antichrist was 538 to 1798. Now, if an Antichrist is one who denies that Jesus is Christ, how can modern Israel be God's chosen people? If the Antichrist does not show up until after the gap, why does John say that they're Antichrist in his day? And you've got a list of the texts. There's 4 of them in the handout that you'll take with you. In Daniel 7, 25 and 26, it says there's 1,260 days. Then the judgment. Where do you fit the gap? And where does it fit in Daniel 11? So again, I come back to why not accept the simplest explanation of prophecy? The simplest answer is the best. Let the Bible explain itself. Find out where it came from, and then ask the question, what does it have to do with Jesus? Why? We want to develop a convoluted explanation if we're not trying to focus on something besides the truth. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is particularly true since there's no secret but a little known fact that the whole dispensationalist futuristic theology is built on the foundation of the Counter-Reformation whose sworn purpose was to stop the Protestant Reformation. That's precisely where all this came from. And Protestantism has swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. And expanded it to some very interesting, as you can see, long toes. I want to be faithful as Daniel was. Amen. Do you? Amen. And I want to hang on to the truth that it holds Jesus Christ, not some Antichrist. How about you?